Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a Path of Exile 2 beginner guide. Now, you're probably here because the other guides you found pretty much weren't telling you anything that was viable for you to understand what is actually happening in Path of Exile 2, or were just very basic tips for beginners. We're not going to do that here. What we're going to do today, though, is I'm going to give you the tools and information that you desperately need in order to get past those specific bosses that you're stuck on, or getting through the campaign to get into the end game where I am right now, clearing Tier 8 and Tier 9 maps. We'll get to that later. The first thing I want to talk about, though, is you're ignoring your default attack. And here's what I mean by that. In PoE 2, your default attack is incredibly powerful. And when I mean powerful, it is very, very powerful. My crossbow shot, which is the default attack that comes with the mercenary, is doing 6,000 DPS per second. Now, to put that into perspective, I am basically stacking explosive grenade. I'm doing a pure grenade build. I am spec'd 4 grenades, and it is doing 11,000 damage per grenade per second. The crossbow shot could carry you, if you wanted to, through the entire campaign, and I bet you're ignoring your default attack. Why? I don't know. Well, let's go ahead and make some fun, though, shall we? Because your default attack can be juiced up, it can be supported, it can be incredibly powerful if you are able to do the right thing for it. So, a couple of things to point out. You have to learn what tags are in this game. Now, if you hold Alt when hovering over the actual skill in the gem cutting screen, you'll see that there is an attack, which is underlined. You also see AoE, which is underlined, and projectile, which is underlined. If you hold Alt, left Alt, and you hover over any underlined word, it will give you detailed information about that actual tag and what it implies. So, when you are going around and you're saying, I don't know if this support works with this skill, all you have to do is look at the tags. This does chaos. It is a support gem. So yes, it is also recommended as well. Now let's have some real fun. Let's uncheck recommended, and you're going to see every other skill gem and support gem applicable that is going to be able to be used. So here's the thing, though. How do we know if that skill gem will work for what we have? Let me just move myself over real quick. Down here, you can just type projectile, because we know that crossbow shot has a projectile. We can do acceleration, which is pretty easy to do. We can also do chaining, deceleration, piercing, scatter shot. Now, I also have some of these on my character already, so that's why they're grayed out. But you can make your actual default attack ricochet, it can fork, it can chain, it can go faster, it can pierce, all simply by just using that tag. Now, that doesn't mean other tags won't work with that skill. Let's say we want to go ahead and have a lightning ability, right? We're using other skills. Lightning seems like a lot of fun. How do we go ahead and add lightning to this crossbow shot? If you just type light on the bottom here, you can then find an actual skill that'll infuse lightning. So check this out. It's an attack, lightning infusion. It's a support requirement for 5 dex. It supports attacks, causing them to gain lightning damage but deal less cold and fire damage. So if we go ahead and get lightning infusion, put it in our crossbow shot, we now increased our DPS by what? 900 DPS by simply adding lightning infusion? That's pretty good. So don't negate your default attack. If you have things and you have support gems that you can use on your default attack to juice it up, make it better, fire more projectiles, do multiple hits at once, have a bigger area of effect, do all kinds of things that will carry you throughout the game instead of simply trying to rely on 1 or 2 skills that you think look cool. Here's a good example of that. A buddy of mine fell down this trap before. This is galvanic shards, excuse me. So galvanic shards says it's an ammunition, it's a projectile, lightning, and chaining. Okay, that seems pretty cool. So it'll convert 40% of my physical damage to lightning damage. If I have 100 physical damage and it converts 40% of that 100 physical damage to lightning damage, how much lightning damage am I doing? 40. 40% of 100. See how that works? So you want to increase the stat that actually provides the bigger bonus. So you want to increase the stat that provides the biggest bonus to your actual skills. So even though boosting lightning would be fun, boosting physical damage for this skill specifically would be far better and provide you with more DPS. But speaking of DPS, this seems kind of weird. It's a cool skill, it chains, it's an AoE, it does a projectile, it does 40% of my physical damage, but I'm only doing 749 DPS. Don't be fooled. Make sure that you look at the damage that you're doing, and again, don't avoid your default attack. Now, speaking of damage, you can also check out the actual breakdown and full details of each skill by hitting that arrow right over here, and then going through this area and finding out what it does with a beam or a projectile or ammunition or all that other good stuff, and see all the information here. On top of that, not only are you not using your default attack, I bet you're not even applying ailments. And ailments are incredibly important. So what are ailments? Well, I'll explain that to you right now. Ailments are actual debuffs that you apply onto enemies, including bosses, so be wary of that. You can, in fact, freeze, shock, stun, bleed, poison, electrocute a boss multiple times. Now, there is diminishing returns, so just be aware of that. That means the more you do it, the less effective it'll be over time. So just keep that in mind. And there is a way to push past that in the skill tree too, which we'll get to next. But if you're avoiding ailments or not stacking ailments onto your abilities, you are hindering yourself directly. If we want to go ahead and do any sort of lightning damage can in fact shock the enemy if we stack for it. And so by doing that, we can just go ahead and here and just type shock. And we can go ahead and add supported skills have 100% more chance to shock. And what does shock do? It's an ailment that causes the target to take 20% increased damage and last 4 seconds by default. So if we shock a boss or an enemy, and it is then shocked, and it has a debuff applied, we are now doing 20% extra damage on top of the regular damage we're already doing. So don't forget about ailments. If you're stuck on the Baron or the Count, I forget. The Count or the Baron? Either one. You know the one I'm talking about. The great, amazing boss fight at the end of Act 1 that everybody gets stuck on. You're probably stuck because of one of two things. You're not using your default attack that you haven't juiced up, and you're not using any sort of damaging ailment or non-damaging ailment to increase your damage on that boss. I bet you're probably thinking to yourself, God, I could have beaten him by now. Yep, I know. So we talked about skills, we talked about tags, we talked about support gems, we talked about default attacks and ailments. Now let's talk about your skill tree, which is incredibly important because everybody freaks out about this thing. I'm going to give you the easiest way of understanding the skill tree. I'm playing a mercenary that is also a witch hunter. Do you see these long stretches of lines right here? Do you see these right here? These are your guardrails. They are your bowling bumpers. They're to keep you in line of what your actual class can do. As you start to understand more about your class and start to look at things differently, you can then deviate out of these safe zones. But the skill tree was specifically designed to keep you inside of these zones. And if you look at every other class like the Ranger, every other class has those same guardrails as well. So you can see that as you zoom out and you sort of like look at it from a top eye perspective, every class has that breakout or those bumpers or highways, as the devs like to call it, to keep you in that zone. Now, the cool thing is you can find specific things of how you want to increase your character, but this is incredibly important. You need to read your skills and understand the tags on not only your skills, your support gems, but also your weapons. Here's a good example. The crossbow is a two-handed ranged weapon that requires strength and dexterity. It's a two-handed weapon. Two-handed weapons take up both weapon slots when equipped. So what does that mean? That means don't close that tag. That means if I see two-handed damage, that damage will in fact boost the damage of my crossbow because it is tagged as a two-handed weapon. See how that works? Understand your tags, understand what they mean, and then read what is happening in your skill tree. And if you want to go ahead and type something, let's say you want to do more shock damage or anything with shock, there's nothing here for that. Oh, there it is. One right there. We can see that it is lit up when we go ahead and type shock in the search bar. 30% increased chance to shock. Damage penetrates 15% lightning resistance. That's fantastic. That means we'll shock more often. The enemy will take more damage over time, or damage in general, and it's going to penetrate any resistance that they have. Even better. Talking about resistance though, I bet you don't have enough. And I bet you're probably in the negatives or barely even at the 0% resistance. You need to focus for resistance on your gear. The most important stats to look for are going to be in this order: life, resistance, then everything else. If you're going to stack armor, that's going to be the most on the bottom thing after life and res. If you're going to stack evasion, that's on the bottom after life and res. If you're not looking for life and resistance on your gear, you're looking for the wrong things. Now, on your weapons, it's very different. Do not put resistance and life on your weapons. Some people do that, and I want to go crazy. Your weapons should be specifically designed for simply nothing but increasing your damage. The gear that you wear to protect yourself needs to have life and resistance, and finding other ways of adding it on there is always going to be a good thing. Why do you want resistance? Well, it's very simple. If there is an enemy doing 100 fire damage to me, and I have 75 fire resist or 75% fire resist, I will take that 100 damage, the game will check my resist, and it will deal only 25 damage to me. Simply by having 75 resist, I have blocked 75% of that 100 points of damage coming my way. So, as you're going through the campaign, you're going to see that your resistances keep getting worse and worse. The higher you level, the more resistance you actually need on your gear to get into a 0% or a positive percent to stop more damage coming your way. On top of that, you also need more HP, because if you don't have any HP to stop the resist, it doesn't matter how much resist you have, because you're still just going to be a piece of paper getting just blasted all the way through. And speaking of resistances and gear, let's talk about the money you're not spending. No, yeah, I see you. I know what you're doing. You're sitting there and you're hoarding every single orb and currency that you possibly can, not spending a dime, and thinking to yourself, well, I'll just find the piece of gear that I need on the floor. You're wrong. You're wrong. You're going to find the base of the piece of gear that you need on the floor, but you're not going to find the perfect piece of equipment without doing something to it. So you want to go ahead and do something to it. Let's say you're playing a monk and you have a staff. I got a 14% block chance with this. Okay, let's go ahead and turn this into a magic item. All right, now we gain mana per enemy killed, and let's add another affix to it. Now we gain accuracy. I don't really like it that much. Then we can make it a rare item. Then we can add more affixes to it, and then we can corrupt it. And if it's stuff that we like, then we'll keep it. Now let's say we don't like this piece of gear. What do we do with it? Well, salvaging is incredibly important, because here your blacksmith whetstones and your armorer scraps and your artificer's orbs are super impactful for your equipment. Your blacksmith whetstone increases the quality of your weapons. Your armorer's scrap increases the quality of your gear, and your artificer's orb adds sockets to your gear. You need to make sure you are at 20% quality for all the pieces of gear you have. So how do you get these kinds of items? Here we go. Any piece of gear that has sockets or is named as superior will be able to give you what you need. Now, as you can see here, this focused advanced barrier quarterstaff of siphoning has 2 sockets. When I salvage it at the bench, I get 2 artificer shards. When I do this advanced leaden great hammer, it's got 1 socket, I get 1 shard. Now here you see a superior expert studded vest. Superior is the key word you want to see on the ground. Even though it is a rare, when I shard it, I get an armorer's scrap. When you see a superior weapon on the ground, you're going to get the actual blacksmith whetstone to increase the quality of your weapons. As you play the campaign, you want to make sure that the enemies in the zone that you are fighting have the same level as the equipment you are wearing. That is incredibly important, or near to it. So this body armor is item level 73. The enemies I am fighting right now are level 75. I am in that same bracket. You don't want to be wearing the same crossbow you had at level 2 to level 15. And you're wondering why I'm doing no damage or 0 DPS. It's because you need to get a new piece of gear to craft, to then make magic, to then make rare, to then make affixes. I know you're like, I don't get enough exalted, Alex. What do I do? It doesn't matter. Spend the money. Spend it, because you're going to make it anyways. You can't make the money when you're trying to get resurrected back at the checkpoint. Now, can you? You got to spend money to make money in this game. Make sure you do it that way. Now, I do have other pieces of gear as well. I've got a magic mace, and I got another rare mace, and I got a quiver. I can't use any of these pieces of gear. So what do? I'm not going to sell them for gold. I'm going to disenchant them. Why? Because when I disenchant them, I get the shards that I need to make the currency that I need in order to go ahead and use that currency to craft my gear. So if you're low on specific types of actual orbs, either transmutation or augmentation, start looking for magic blue colored gear. If you need more regal orbs to turn magic items to rare items, start looking for more rare pieces of gear. Even if you can't wear that piece of gear, sharding that actual item is going to benefit you much more than just leaving it on the ground because you don't want to use it. Because you can use these regal orbs on anything that is an item that is magic, except for flasks. So making sure that you pick up the right equipment, not only for yourself, but also to actually just break down and shard and use that for other currency, is a smart play to do. That will keep you full of the currency you need to continually craft on your gear to get better, so you don't do low damage and you don't keep dying while you're playing the campaign. And let's talk about the last two tips that are basically going to be congruent with each other. I think that's a good way of putting it. Let's talk about rolling, and let's talk about crowd control. See, everybody has a problem with the rolling in this game. This game has a very specific thing, and it's not about doing a lot of damage, it's about controlling the screen. I have a skill here that says Flash Grenade. It creates a bouncing grenade that unleashes a blinding and stunning explosion when its fuse expires. So, I can in fact stun the enemies on the screen, stopping them in their tracks. I can also blind them, meaning that they have less accuracy so they don't hit me that often. So I am in fact controlling the screen. That is incredibly important to understand in this game. If you do not control the screen, you will in fact get overwhelmed. In fact, I would dare say that crowd control abilities are more important than damaging abilities, and I'll show you why. Let's go ahead and find some enemies here. And as you can see, there's 3 or 4 of them. No, there's more than that. There's a ton of them here, and they hit very, very hard. If I throw that grenade, most of them die by that actual explosion, but if they didn't die, they would in fact be stunned. Once they're stunned, that gives me an opening to go ahead and then lay out the other types of damage that I have, giving you that breathing room and that space. Here's what you don't do in this game. You don't look at enemies and go, oh no, let me roll. Let me roll again. Oh no, I'm stuck. Oh no, I rolled into other enemies. No, don't stop it. Don't do that. Because look, you just pulled a giant pack by doing that. No, control the screen, stun them, freeze them, shock them, electrocute them, slow them, maim them. Do whatever you can to give you breathing room to then combo those other skills into your abilities to then provide the damage that you want to do. In fact, here's a good clip of me fighting a boss recently by doing that exact same thing.
Oh, all I did was touch it. Where'd I go? Not yet. No, mother. Need a sec. dangerous.
So there you have it. Make sure that you don't roll into enemies all the time, don't panic roll, and find some abilities or skills that help you control the actual environment that you're in, or give you the ability to have some breathing room in order to do the damage you're supposed to do. This is not Path of Exile 1 where one button clears the whole screen. You want to start comboing abilities and thinking about how you're going to understand what you need to do in order to give yourself that room to breathe, to then provide the combo and then erase the entire screen. That's when this game starts to open up for you, and that's when things become a hell of a lot of fun. So there you go. Those are your actual beginner tips for Path of Exile 2. I hope this helped. If you do want to ask any other specific questions, I do stream every Friday night on this channel. You can check me out here. It is beginner friendly. I answer every beginner question as well, and I will be doing endgame content while we do that. So go ahead, show up Friday nights, 8:45 p.m. Eastern. We'll be here streaming, and you'll be able to ask me anything that you need, or even just hang out and just chill with the chat. If you want to see more of this kind of content, though, subscribe as well. I'm doing more beginner guides, more build guides, and also news on anything ARPG. And as always, thank you guys so much for watching. Hope you have a great one, and I'll see you next time.